Hello, everyone. I am joined by Fiona Mullan, an experienced HR leader with a strong background in shaping workplace culture and employee well-being. Fiona has held leadership roles currently, like Bloom and Wild, Facebook before, and Accenture, focusing on people strategy, talent development, and creating environments where employees can thrive. She's passionate about the role of leadership in fostering a healthy, supportive workplace. And I'm proud to say that Fiona is on the Car Connect board of directors. Fiona, welcome to Can We Have a Word? I am very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I have a few questions that are kind of all over the place, but we also can go off on a tangent if we are interested. First one is, what are the three biggest priorities on your table as Chief People Officer of Bloom and Wild this year?
So, I think the current time we're in is just so interesting for any HR team, but ours particularly. The first is really the opportunity with AI and how that will transform work. And obviously, there's so much unknown around that, but still, that's exciting. The second, which has been with us for a little while, is this duality between connection and flexibility within our culture and the way we work together. And then the third is within our own people team to see us as being stronger change enablers, most particularly for the opportunity that AI presents for us in the future and the role that we play to guide the organization to take that opportunity in terms of how work will evolve. So they're my three, I'm going to call them opportunities versus challenges.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit more about the awakening of AI? And so Bloom and Wild sells flowers at the end game, but it has a technology platform to doing that. I guess your team is quite high tech and thinking about tech. So they must be asking questions as well.
Well, yes. And look, we're an online flower and gifting retailer. We're based in 8 markets around Europe. We are headquartered out of London and we have operations in France and in the Netherlands. We have always been tech enabled. And originally the founders of the company didn't have a background in floristry or gifting. And really it has been the understanding of consumer behavior and the building of technology to create great customer experiences that has fueled Bloom and Wild and innovated the kind of products that we bring to market. Like many companies, we're evaluating where AI can really help us. And specifically in relation to work, we're looking at this as a real opportunity so that we can enrich work, that we can find AI opportunities for more operational tasks and give people more time to do work that is not only more valuable, but also more fulfilling for them and ultimately more enjoyable. And with that, I think work would be better for everybody and ultimately business outcomes will be better. And so that is the way we're trying to engage all of our team to experiment with tools. They know their work more intimately than anybody else. So with good guardrails and guidelines and supports and great champions, we're guiding them to experiment with tools that they think could help them in their work. Obviously, starting with the obvious ones between Gemini and ChatGPT, the main LLMs, which can be used for immediate productivity gains. But there are others that are more specific to certain kinds of roles, we're encouraging people to use and see what might be best for us. So it's a real moment of empowerment, to be honest. It's very much let's all embrace this. We're all starting from the same position as far as this is very new. It's moving quickly, but everybody has an opportunity to bring that expertise into their own role and then serve that back out to the rest of the company with some opportunities to which we may choose over time. Some of that's a bit, it's of the unknown. It may feel a little scary, but we believe it's both career enhancing, skill building. Ultimately, it's a valuable opportunity for our business.
I really think it's a fascinating viewpoint coming from HR. When you say all this, it's obvious it should be coming from HR. How did you kind of get comfortable with all this? Did you, study the technology, or did you all know this, what was happening before?
Not particularly. I have had my career in the technology world for a very long time. So on the one hand, I'm, oriented to things moving quickly and technology changing how we work and live. That's certainly something I've been quite comfortable with and very interested in. And I think it's why technology companies very specifically have been at the forefront of leading developments in workplace culture. But that aside, I think it's just really interesting. And I think it gives the HR function renewed opportunity to add real material value to organizations. And organizations have gone through a lot of change, as we all know, over the last number of years. They've become less structured, less hierarchical, more agile. Technology has been at the forefront of that. And, AI gives us a whole other somewhat unknown opportunity. So rather than, I guess, be fearful of it, I'm an optimist at heart. So I feel like, okay, there are definite concerns here that we need to be very mindful of, but let's really face up to those. And within those parameters, let's make the most of this opportunity. And if we are the custodians of work and how work is done, and if we want to shape the work environment so that it's really good for people to do work and thrive, then we should be in the heart of that conversation.
Yeah.
We're not technologists, we're social scientists. But what it does do is force us to really partner with our, IT and technology functions, because they also recognize that they're not social scientists and they do need that partnership to
Yeah.
get greater engagement in the tools and apply them to all opportunities, not just those who are more technically inclined and who would naturally seek these tools out.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, new things are people and processes 90%, not the technology. So it's
Absolutely.
people. Yeah. Amazing. Can you tell us from all your experience, Accenture, Meta, and these big giants, what are the kind of most significant challenges that you have seen, or, the significant wins that you've seen, like a real breakthrough HR story?
The challenge, I think, has, in my experience, is always change. And the more acute that change, the one that I would pick is trying to scale a company. And that can come from immense growth, or it can come from acquiring and integrating companies, or being acquired and being integrated. It involves a significant amount of extra work and a huge amount of change for people, those that are there, and also those that are going to be new. And in any of the experiences I've had through any of my 3 companies, I've had, immense growth, huge kind of startup experience, acquisition as well. And the commonality in those challenges are all exciting, positively exciting, because there are also changes that are less interesting, but they feel less good at the time, which might be in this restructuring category. But those that involve scale involve a huge amount more work and pressure and stress. And the goal is huge, whether that's, growing a company to 2 or 3x its size, or absorbing a company with a different culture. And what hasn't worked, let me start by saying, because I've tried this too, is to hire more people and to work harder. And I think there's an assumption that, because that's what most people do, and I have done that, is just throw bodies at it and work harder. And of course, we all do that. And eventually we realize it doesn't work. A, you don't have enough hours in the day, and often you become less productive because you're working really hard. And B, you do need more resources, but if you do that too much, they create more work than they do, because you have to keep onboarding them, and the organization becomes more complicated because you've got so many people. So for me, in that scenario, what has worked is really just common sense focus on first normalize the situation and call it for what it is, which is, chaotic and, insurmountable levels of work, and try and make people feel good about it, that it's okay, that that's what they're experiencing, because we're all experiencing it. And I find stress levels get very high when people try to control that too much and have a sense that it shouldn't be like that. The fact of the matter is, it just is, and it is never going to be any different. The second is rigorous prioritization. And by that, I mean, because it's easy to say and harder to do, is pick the very small number of things that must be achieved. And then a second tier of things that can be achieved, but to a much lesser degree of quality, and be absolutely rigorous about that division. And then there's a third category of thing, which is important to do, but not now. And making sure that things that are very hard to choose to put in that category are in that category, and keep everybody honest about that and communicate it really well, and then people accept it. I think beyond that, it is, obviously pick successes and give people a sense of when successes are, in front of them, because people have very different versions of what success looks like. And that needs to be near term and material and achieved. because it feels unsuccessful. And so can you give people a sense that, this is actually quite successful? And then the social things, there's lots of social time and good time off. Like, we all need to recover, we all need time out, sabbaticals and good time off, even though it feels really uncomfortable. So to try and create sustainability into the work pace. I really enjoy those kind of environments. I like ambiguity and I like, that intensity, but they're big challenging moments. And they're the times when employees and leaders come to my virtual door and say, this is tough, or I want out. And, how do you frame things differently so that they can somewhat understand what's going on around them in a way that gives them a greater sense of control for their work, but also the environment around them?
It feels like what you've learned is managing expectation is a big part of the job. How in your, current and older jobs, how have you been able to communicate with other managers on that? Have you kind of worked closely with them on one-on-ones, or, how do you, as the heart of the company, keep the expectations correct? Do you manage to build in a good relationship, or do you have like a specific protocol or cadence to make sure that you're in line with all the managers and where they're going?
I'm probably better doing it with other managers than I am with my own team, because I most likely have higher expectations of myself and my own team because I'm biased, and that's not a good thing, obviously. I think with the rest of the teams, managers, leaders, during that time, I see us in the people team as coaches for them, be available to help them develop awareness around the environment within which they're working and for their team, and have an opportunity, I guess, for a little bit of a time out to then get perspective and think about their plan ahead. So that can be effective. It can be tricky if you've a lot and you don't have enough time in the day to get to every one-on-one. But I remember that to me is important and is a factor of any of my experiences, and most recently, even in Bloom and Wild, and big change moments that we've had. Specifically back to my Meta days, when we were growing so quickly, we simply didn't have enough people team members, to pay attention to all of our people managers. So we solicited extra help and brought in extra coaches to help us with that. And because we didn't have the programs that were able to provide training at scale for them at that point, we were trying to do it one-on-one. So that's how in the very short term we tried to scale it. So yes, one-on-one and then group, I find building manager communities either online or in face-to-face sessions can be really helpful, because them realizing that they are going through the same thing and can offer support to each other, and some more experienced than others. So you find, I think, richness in community support as well, so that it's not always on the people team. And the people team can support that community as being one that is a kind of safe place for peer-to-peer support.
Interesting. It feels to me, the more I speak to HR managers, that you have so many hats. It's quite a lot. Internal marketing and branding as well, and well-being and health and all these things. It's quite the big task for sometimes just one person in a company.
I think that's right. I used to joke with my team, that we're the nurse, the priest, the police,
the fireman,
the teacher, the crisis coordinator. Sometimes these roles feel in conflict to each other, right? And as you say, if you're one person or two people, it's hard to be all of those things at once. It really is hard.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything, I do think HR teams need a lot of support, because the demands on them have never been greater.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Can I jump into a different question about culture? You've been all over the world, really. Can you just share with us, like, what are the biggest cultural differences that you've encountered, basically, and how maybe, shortly, just an example, how you worked on them, possibly within a company or between companies?
It's a really, really interesting question. Like, I think cultural difference between countries is definitely something I have found very interesting. And the biggest cultural shift for me was doing HR work in China, where I was used to working in teams that would have very strong cultural mixes.
Yeah.
And therefore the company culture was the thing that bound us, if you like. But when you're the person who's not of the same culture as most everybody in your team and the client group that you are supporting, that was a real learning
Yeah.
for me. And, I had all my HR tools, but I didn't have any of my cultural tools. And it was a humbling experience because their language barrier and cultural barrier. So, your natural tool of reading the room, that wasn't an obvious thing I could do anymore. So, Asian culture was quieter, less direct, more one on one, quite hierarchical, very respectful, long term thinking. So, my lesson there was build followership and build individual trust with people, which seems true in most every culture, but it was the
Yeah.
kind of only thing I had available to me in that environment. And that worked. You'd be surprised if it didn't, I guess, because it's kind of human nature to build relationships. But that is time with people, going for dinner, getting to know people personally. And I think that's probably one of the differences. And there's lots of research around this that, if you work in a very direct communicative culture like US culture, which I was used to, there's an automatic acceptance and, we can share personal insights, but we can get straight to work. But similar in Southern European culture, we will spend time getting to know each other and then we'll build personal trust and then we'll do work together. Personally, that was really enriching. Arguably, I think it's a nicer way to work, but I realized it was the only way for me to work effectively.
I really like that point that the work is building the culture together with different personality and diverse backgrounds. And I can see you were in the other seat there for time being, at least when you're in China or in Asia.
In the minority, it was a very helpful thing for me to learn.
Yeah.
You take for granted when you are, in the majority culture, however you want to describe that.
I hear that you want to have people rejuvenating and healthy. How do you implement it at Bloom and Wild? And, how have you progressed in implementing health or support protocols for well-being and support, basically?
It's a really important question, and I wish there was easy answers to it, right? And if there were, Cara Connect probably wouldn't have the important role it plays. I'm going to start with culture, first of all, because I think that is the kind of fundamental starting point of creating an environment that's preventative insofar as a workplace that, in our case, one that we strive to be a place where people feel that they can belong. We have an approach which I think is beneficial for creating an environment that cares and that is healthy for people, which is, we believe in two things. We believe in many things. We have a number of values, but these two things to me are important in this topic. One is connection and the other is flexibility. And there's an argument for saying those two things are in conflict with each other, which is you really want connection, get everybody to the office, and obviously they'll be connected. But we offer a lot of flexibility for people to do work and how and where they believe it can best be done. And we have created, I guess, a philosophy with our employees whereby we say, you have full lives and we want to create an environment that allows you to live those in the best way that you know how. It is important in how we do our work that we feel connected to each other in a way that's meaningful. And sometimes that will be face-to-face because that's important for doing certain kinds of work and for building trust and relationships. A lot of times that's going to be virtual, but in there was a space for you to find a pattern that suits you. And there's a space for teams to come together in very cohesive ways to feel connected. And there's a space for us to do really meaningful work that drives business results for our company. And I believe people feel a sense of belonging, I guess, at different altitudes. One is within their small work group, people they work with very closely every day. Then with their team, if that's a broader team. Then within their office, if they're attached to an office, and then with the company. And each of those plays a slightly different role, but they're all important. They each need to find their place. And so that they are welcoming in each environment, however that shows up, whether it's virtual or in the office, that they're welcoming and everybody both contributes as well as receives. The other concept we've been really clear about is that culture is a thing that is co-created, and that your ability to contribute to it is my ability to experience it. And so if we're all at home not contributing to culture, well, then there is a culture, but we haven't really actively created it. But if we're all active in contributing to it, and very particularly when we're physically in the office together, everybody has a great time and a great sense of belonging. Mentally, I think that's a very healthy place to be, because people get an outcome that suits their work style, suits their personal circumstances, and teams get to be very healthy, and ultimately the culture is strong. Then as it relates to specific supports and needs that people have, we've tried to, I guess, lead by being open that, we recognize people are going through things and that we're here to help. One of our values is caring wildly. And, we encourage people to seek support. And we have, obviously opportunities to provide training for people. We've got mental health first aider program. And then we have access to support for counseling as needed. And so we talk about that whenever we can. We've got various different groups where people belong to. And we also encourage teams to engage with the topic of resilience and the preventative measures that they can take, but also the supports that they can provide to each other. And as I said, some people have elected to become qualified in providing mental health first aid. The last thing I'll say is that I think this is really important is quality people managers are really important here. And I think, they do a really critical role. There's research out there that has shown us that the quality of my management relationship is more influential on my well-being than that of my doctor or my spouse. So that's perhaps a little provocative, but I think it makes the general point that if I have a really good people manager who challenges me and supports me, with whom I have psychological safety, and, I feel supported, whatever my challenges. If I have someone who doesn't exhibit those kind of standards or is ill-equipped, and mostly it's not through intention, it's through lack of experience or training, then I can feel very different depending on the issue that I have. And so I certainly believe in investing a lot in people management and priding us in having quality people managers, because I think that really has an outsized impact on the overall employee experience, and very particularly for people who have specific needs.
I mean, I think also there's research on how many hours you need to spend with people, not just on work, but still combined, to be able to trust them. So to trust a coworker on an issue that is really troubling you, they say you need 200 hours of being together. And that's a lot of time. So there is, just between your connectivity and flexibility, there's some kind of a scale that trust builds on. And it doesn't necessarily always succeed, but has to have some kind of a breakout way for it.
I just anecdotally, through my own experience, I can see how that makes sense.
Yeah, I think mental health first aiders probably know this research, but they really need to make sure that they're not probably getting through with just a formal chat.
Yes.
So the signposting's important there, and trust, of course, to those people. If I am an HR manager, I'm just in seat and I'm supposed to improve culture and well-being and support strategies in the company. What kind of 2 or 3 things would you recommend to them to start doing in the beginning of their journey?
I would engage people who have an interest and experience in it. So try and gather champions who can model and, if possible, tell their story, but certainly make this a more normalized. This point you made around, creating trust and openness, I think there needs to be some modeling of that to open the opportunity for people to engage in it, so that it's not viewed as being a performative program. And here's another thing that the HR team have rolled out, but that it is really meaningful. And I think then there's no getting away from the need for provision of quality support for employees, and that is easily accessed. We know that early intervention is critical. And then I think, education, whether that is, the depth of mental health first aid education for those who can take on that responsibility, education for managers, which may not be to the quality of or the depth of mental health first aid, but that they have an awareness of what to notice, I guess, and perhaps know how to respond, which is more about redirecting perhaps and supporting individual needs, how to engage the HR function. But I think manager training is critical. And then, I think educate yourself as a HR person, perhaps the first thing, but ideally having somebody that may have an interest who is prepared to go deep on the topic, be scanning the market and updating their own skills and being available if they're needed. And that's a tall order. It's not something I would ask of everybody. And I would certainly want someone to feel comfortable taking that on. But I think that depending on your size of team, I think that could be one possible structural change you could make. I do think HR teams need support with this because we're into a space that is at one level medicalized, and we ought to be, deepening our own knowledge, but equally knowing very quickly when our role is,
Yeah.
come to
Yeah.
one threshold and needs to be passed over to, a more expert provider. So I think that's important that we get our own support for knowing what our role is and what it is not.
Yeah, and I think it's completely sad and just such a bad way of thinking about our world right now, because usually we could have said, do you have any support around you? And but a lot of people are just really lonely and isolated. And I think that's something that we're going to grapple with for a while longer. So last question, Fiona. If you would be graduating out of a management program and you're going to be an HR manager, what would you give yourself as an advice?
Gosh, when I was coming out of a program, the advice I would give myself if I was graduating, I think would be very different. If I was graduating now, I would say, there's still time for me to go and keep upgrading my skills here. And I am trying. But I think people, teams, and me as a graduate needs to be more comfortable with data and analytics. We are looking for measurement on some of the interventions that we're putting in place. And we're looking on all sorts of levels, not just for the kind of things we've been talking about, but looking at employee sentiment, behavior, and measuring the impact of our programs requires a much more analytical mindset, but then also the tooling required to that. So I think that wasn't necessarily something that would have been natural when I was in university. I think it is much more now.
Very good answer. I think there are going to be more demands on HR to deliver and show ROI and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about, ROI on financial terms, but ROI in terms of, is this making a difference? And I think we have to be more assured that it is making a difference. So.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Fiona, for your time. Very grateful for it.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you soon.